So what is Common Core? Common Core is an abbreviated term used to refer to the Common Core State Standards Initiative, a set of national standards for English and math with science forthcoming. They're already feeding the science in. This represents an absolute takeover of education at the part of the federal government, and it's going to absolutely impact homeschool and private schools as well. Almost every single Roman Catholic diocese leapt to the front of the line to take Common Core without being asked. The feds could not have asked for that. And they're doing it because they're terrified, and many of our private Lutheran schools and private evangelical Presbyterian schools have taken it without being asked. And the reason our private schools have taken it is because they're terrified. The SATs and the ACTs, even though we're just beginning to implement Common Core in the schools, the SATs and the ACTs are already being transformed to Common Core. In fact, David Coleman, the man singularly responsible for orchestrating the standards, no sooner did he orchestrate them than he rotated off and became the chair of the college boards, where now he is, before kids have even had a year or two to fully marinate in the garbage that is Common Core, ACT and SAT have already gone over there. This is what we're dealing with here. It's a big deal. Now, who gave them to us? This is one of the most shocking aspects of this. The Common Core state standards, they throw the word state in there for the same reason they throw the word affordable in the Affordable Care Act, because they think if they just say it, somehow people will believe it, and a lot of them do. States had no say in this. Common Core standards were written by 5 men behind closed doors, part of 2 Washington lobbyist groups, the NJUPGA and the CCSSO. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, these 2 left-leaning lobbyist groups, are responsible for crafting the standards, and 5 individuals behind them. Where did they get the money to do so? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation turned over $1.5 million initially. And as we stand here today, Bill Gates has spent $2.5 billion on Common Core, promoting it, implementing it, and bribing people to take it. It's a pretty shocking thing. And I ask you, what qualification does Bill Gates have to write education curriculum? If you look at the people who wrote the standards, almost none of them have any national level experience with English or math standards. So Bill Gates, behind closed doors, ponies up billions of dollars to bribe groups, including like the National Parent Teachers Association, millions of dollars in Gates money to push Common Core before it was even written. The NCEA, the largest Catholic education organization, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to lobby for Common Core in Catholic schools. Right? All because Gates paid for it, and these lobbyist groups put it together. And when you hear the National Governors Association, it's tempting to think, oh boy, 50 state governors got in a room and banged out education standards. That would have been better than what we have. But if you stop and think about it, what in the world experience do any of your state governors have in education? None. Why did they do it this way? I'm about to show you how this is absolutely a federal curriculum. But before I do that, let me show you the copyright. This will blow you away. There's the copyright for Common Core. It's not owned by anybody who can be touched by the voter, by the taxpayer. All right, this is the curriculum that is in the process of transforming our public and private schools, transforming the way education is done in this country. And they're unaccountable to anybody. They're unelected, they're unaccountable. Everybody behind Common Core has deep and intimate ties to the federal government, to the Obama administration. Well, why did they do it this way? Well, because of a 1965 legislative act, the federal government is prohibited from creating a national curriculum. They can't do it. So they did the next best thing. They farmed it out to a small group of leftist ideological purists funded by the Gates Foundation. To date, the only thing the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has spent more money on than Common Core is abortion and population control in Africa. We ask your Catholic schools, ask your private Christian and Lutheran schools how you adopt a curriculum like this, put in place by these guys, how you adopt it for your Christian values. It's impossible. So you got these 2 small lobbyist groups, and basically 5 people. Joy Pullman at the Heartland Institute wrote a wonderful article tracing this back to 5 ideologues, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. We know that no matter how many billions Bill Gates has, he could not have gotten this curriculum into the federal government, into the federal schools. Couldn't have happened. So how did it happen? How many of you remember Race to the Top? Well, Race to the Top back in 2009, right? President Obama's, remember back in 08 and 09 when President Obama was stimulating everything except the economy? You remember that? Banks and car companies. Well, he also wanted to stimulate education. So what Obama did through Race to the Top is he offered billions and billions of taxpayer money to every state in the union through the Race to the Top application program. And this was basically free money for the states. Give you an example. New York State received $700 million simply for their education budgets. They could spend it any way they wanted. So back in 2000, 2008, 2008, and 2009, if you simply accepted race to the top money, you were on the hook. The only proviso in that race to the top is that if you take government money through race to the top, you have to accept the Common Core state standards when they are finally written. That's how 46 states in the Union got Common Core sight unseen. That's insidious. But even with all of that, right, we look at the way that there's your copyright. And this, I think, is shocking. That the educational scheme that's transforming the country, we can't get at them. If they're destroying your kids, if they're destroying education, if it's a big failure, you have no way to get to them. As repulsive as the Department of Education is, at least if they own this, if they own the copyright, you could put pressure on them. You can't now. How did we get them? So the Obama administration basically bribes 46 states in the Union to take a curriculum they hadn't seen. And there's one other interesting thing about Race to the Top. Race to the Top dangled one more carrot in front of the states to take this money. I'm surprised that only 46 states took it. 4 states refused. Alaska, Nebraska, Virginia, and Texas were the 4 states that absolutely refused to take it, even with all the promises of free money. But there was one more carrot dangled in front of the states to take Common Core. If you took Common Core, not only do you get all this money, but you get an exemption, you get an actual waiver from No Child Left Behind, the previous ridiculous standards-based one-size-fits-all education program. So what the federal government had the temerity to do is basically say, you all hate No Child Left Behind? And where did that come from? Who was the president that gave us No Child Left Behind? George Bush. Now, Bush, of course, didn't write it. Who wrote it for Bush? Ted Kennedy. You know that? Can you name the last time? And Bush has got this reputation as this, as an audience know better. Bush was no conservative. But you understand, right, that George Bush ceded the writing of the educational curriculum No Child Left Behind to the most liberal member of the Senate. And it's been a disaster. Well, what is Common Core? Common Core is basically No Child Left Behind on steroids. All the worst aspects of Common Core. So you see the temerity of this, right? No Child Left Behind was a failure. I've never met a liberal teacher, a liberal principal, a liberal educator who had anything but contempt for Common Core, for No Child. And what do they hate about No Child? One-size-fits-all education. Standards-based education, meaningless national tests, all of this. Well, so the feds say, we'll give you $700 million, New York, and we'll let you out of No Child Left Behind, which you hate. But little do you know, you're going to be getting something that's exponentially worse than No Child Left Behind and is utterly more centralized at the federal level. Right now, all we have are English and math standards. Science has already been written, and it's a disaster now and that's the other thing. Common Core is branding so badly that they've changed the name of the science standards. They don't call them Common Core Science. They call them Next Generation Science. And you actually have superintendents and principals and people at the Department of Education running around telling people that there is no Common Core Science. Right? And the vast majority of moms and dads and people in the country, oh, well, that makes sense. It doesn't have Common Core on it, right? What we have so far is English and math. What's wrong with the standards? Because as conservative people, right, we say standards are a good thing. We want to hold people to standards. Problem is that these standards are arbitrary. They're utterly controlled by the government. And it's one size fits all. It's socialism, basically. Outcome-based education. It doesn't matter where your kids are in their homes, in their environments. It doesn't matter what your kids' preparation is or their family life is. It doesn't matter when you get the kids in the class, right, what the kids as individuals. The whole objective is to get kids to an arbitrary standard. How many of you have kids or grandkids? Can you get your 2 daughters and your son to get the same grades, the same performance in every single subject? Can you do that? Of course you can't. How are you going to do it with 60 million American school kids? So you're not. It's a failure in education. The English standards. My main objection to the Common Core standards, and the main objection of most people, is not the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. We've seen enough of Common Core to know that they're going to be educated less well in reading and math and science. It's just inevitably going to happen. The creators of Common Core even admit that. Jason Zimba, the man who wrote the Common Core math standards, in an interview a couple months ago finally admitted that it's true. Common Core math will not prepare your kids for STEM careers or for college-level math. Science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. He, the man who wrote the standards, conceded that at best, the brightest of your kids under Common Core might be ready for a 2-year technical program. Might be, at the best. And just last September, in the Washington Post, Bill Gates said of his own program, quote, It would be nice to know if our education stuff is going to work, but it's going to take at least 10 years before we know. Your kids are guinea pigs. What are the big problems with the English standards? Well, 50% of all the literature kids read in English classes, as an English prof, this is very acutely a problem for me. We teach kids to read through stories. When you want to read your kids a bedtime story, you don't read them a Bill Gates computer manual. But wouldn't that put them to sleep? So obviously the purpose of reading is something else. It's cognitive, right? Kids learn how to read through stories, engagement. And through reading, they get a 2,000-year, reading the classics, they get a 2,000-year overview of our Judeo-Christian heritage. In reading the American literature the last 200-300 years, they get to learn what it's like to be an American, the struggle of Americanness, all through the centuries. All that's gone now. Because Common Core requires up to 50% of literature be removed for informational texts. And all of those informational texts come from the federal government. They're reading in 2nd grade, 4th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade. They're reading President Obama's executive orders. And one critic one validation committee member who refused to vote for Common Core, she argued that up to 75% of the informational texts that replace literature, up to 75% of them tout man-made global warming and America as the America's role in destroying the planet. And there is no balance to these texts. Furthermore, Common Core lowers the overall level of reading kids do by 50% and has them writing before they read, has them writing more than they read. Now, if your 2nd and 3rd and 4th graders are actually writing more than they're reading, what do you think they're writing about? Whatever philosophical and sociological positions the government gives them. That's how you get the assignment that 3rd graders in Wisconsin, the state I live in, that's how you get that assignment that went viral. About end of last semester, a group of 3rd graders were sent home with the following assignment. Explain how government is just like the family but better. And if you ask me in a nutshell what Common Core is, I just said to you that the ABCs 1, 2, 3's aspect of Common Core, how you educate your kids, it's already a failure. The states that have had it longer than most states, like New York is one of those states that it got rolled out 2 years earlier. Well, New York saw its test scores plummet from the high 70s to the low 30s in math, reading, English, science. And so now the New York State Teachers Union, hardly a repository of right-wing kookery, right? Yeah. The New York State Teachers Union voted unanimously to halt the implementation of Common Core and to fire the superintendent of schools who brought it there. The NEA, the National Education Association, the single largest teacher union organization in the country, called the implementation of Common Core so utterly botched that we have to scrap it and start over. And you know who else opposes this? The Occupy Wall Street movement. Because there you go. So now you've got allies. Go out and meet them, right? The Occupy Wall Street movement. Why? Because of the crony capitalism behind this. Whose computers do you think it's going to take to upgrade all these school systems? Yeah, you got it, right? So here are some of those informational texts that are replacing literature in your kids' English classes. So 9th freshman in high school, recommended levels of insulation. A report released by the Department of Energy and the EPA. That's going to make your kids love reading, isn't it? How about this? For 11th grade, 10th graders, President Obama's own Executive Order 13423, How to Strengthen Federal Environmental, Energy, and Transportation Management. A long essay on the evolution of the grocery bag. Spoiler alert, paper and plastic are both bad and America's destroying the planet. Over and over again, this is the kind of unmitigated government propaganda your kids are now reading. I guarantee you they're not reading Moby Dick in science class, and they're not reading Shakespeare in math class. What they're doing is, and so as much as I dislike the ABCs and 1, 2, 3's, we'll show you why. The bigger problem is all this. Every single aspect of this curriculum is a sociological takeover. It's ideological. In fact, the whole how you add, subtract, multiply, and divide, read and write doesn't even matter. It's not going to be as effective, but they don't care about that. This is their contribution in Common Core. Everything now comes from a markedly leftist, atheist, materialist perspective. Right? Even math, which I'll show you in a minute. And then what little literature they actually do, and I've blocked out the worst words. I know we've got some younger kids here, and that's okay. This talk is going to be okay for them. But one question remains, of what little literature is left in Common Core English, even at the youngest grades, why is so much of it sexually, developmentally, and graphically inappropriate? What little literature they do leave in Common Core, it is either incredibly violent and graphic, or it exposes kids way young to think radical issues like homosexuality, mainstreaming it, or it's just plain pornographic. I can only give you one example here. This is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. It's for 11th and 10th. It's even been taught to 8th graders in Common Core. It's even been taught in Catholic schools at 9th grade, freshmen in high school. This book is one we don't assign in college to college freshmen. Toni Morrison is a Nobel Prize-winning novelist, African-American novelist. This book we would not recommend, we would not assign to our freshmen in college. It's about a 12-year-old girl who's the victim of rape and incest. And over the course of her relationship with her tormentor, she comes to bond with him and writes in exceedingly graphic terms about their relationship. The bad words are all blocked out. I'm just going to show you a clip. Take a quick look at it. These are the kind of things that Common Core routinely does to your kids. This book has been in schools as young as for 8th graders. Okay. There's another book, Dreaming in Cuban, which is equally graphic. In fact, Sandy Stotsky, who is the English language arts specialist, who was called in to look at the curriculum by the Common Core, she voted no. She said, there are 40 different books in Common Core that are graphically sexual beyond what we would allow college kids to read. Why? I'll leave that hang for just a second. Why is so much of the literature they've got left so inordinately violent or pornographic when there are so many good books to read? Why is so much of what's left this? We'll see in a moment why. This crowd, I'm sure you have a pretty good sense of it. What about math? Well, Professor James Milgram, when the Common Core got together to validate their standards, they brought in some experts to look at what they had done and get a seal of approval. They brought in only one math specialist and only one English specialist. The English specialist was Dr. Stotsky. She said, no way. Stotsky said, and I quote, Common Core English will set our kids 2 years behind the 2 years they're already behind the rest of the world when it comes to reading and writing. And the math professor was a man by the name of James Milgram, a retired Stanford University math professor. Milgram is an amazing man. We brought both of them to Wisconsin to testify against Common Core. FreedomProject did that. It's one of the things we do to try to outreach. So we brought them there, and Milgram is the guy, by the way, who did most of the mathematical calculations for the Apollo moonshot in the late 60s. He's a serious man. He says, and I quote, it's an absolute joke to think Common Core math will prepare your kids for college careers. No way. And Zimba, the guy who wrote Common Core math, just 2 months ago agreed with him. So there you go. When I asked Milgram, if this is not about math excellence, what's it about? And he pointed me to this video. It's a 29-year-old woman. You can't make this up. She is a community organizer from Chicago. And he said, she's talking to a group of Illinois high school teachers about math. And Milgram said, this is it. They would show us not a single shred of evidence, any mathematical or statistical evidence that showed that this curriculum had ever been tested before, ever been tried before, or that it was in any way, shape, or form efficacious. This, he said, is what Common Core math is about.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and in oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the why.
Yeah, you heard her. That the right answer is absolutely subordinate to making kids feel community with regards to math. One of the ways Common Core math is done, and please be assured when I check my phone, I'm just watching my time, not being disrespectful. One of the ways Common Core math is done with younger grades is to take kids and put them into groups of 2 and 3. And then teachers don't teach math, they simply hand out assignments. The purpose of the assignment is to get the kids to agree what they think the right answer is, whether it's right or not. Got a kid in New York, right, who 6 times 3rd grader, 6 times 7, 42. He got it marked wrong. The other 2 kids in his group who agreed on the wrong answer, they got it marked right. Over and over again across Common Core, you see this happening, right? And Milgram points to the following video. It's a short clip. I won't show you all of it in the interest of time. It's a little girl trying to do math. Milgram pointed this one out because the mother in the video is one of his former math students. She's a PhD in math, a math professor. She can't help her 3rd grade daughter with her homework. And here's a quick view of how Common Core math gets done. Simple addition problem, 1568, 1423, and 680.
So what I want you to do is, can you solve that problem showing me the way that you learned how to solve it in school?
Okay.
And talk to me while you're solving it.
So we learned that a big square like this is 100.
Okay, a square equals 100.
So we could make that 100 into a cube, which would make 1,000. So I'm going to do that.
So if a square is 100, then a cube is 1,000.
to do 500, could make that into 5 sheets.
Do you notice how nobody's adding anything? This is the rigmarole you have to go through just to get the numbers on the board you're going to add.
60, which are just lines of 10.
The lines equal 10s, the dots equal 1s. So you got one number now.
For her birthday, she got 1,000.
3rd grade. About 8 years old.
23.
Here's your second number.
The dots represent 1.
Okay.
So now we have to add all of these together. So you could make 1,000. All of these together is 400. Now you need 600 more. So now I'm going to write the numbers down. So we have 1,000 plus, well, let's just say 3,000 because we have 3 cubes. 3,000 plus 100, 200, 300. So now we can erase all these sheets and hundreds and tens and say. So we can just add, and that gives us a total.
Okay, she gets the number. That problem took 8 minutes to solve.
Okay. Now that problem you just solved took about 8 minutes.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's what we're doing in school. But at home, I'm taught how to stack, and we're not allowed to do stacking in school. That's why we have to figure it out that way.
You do stacking math in Common Core, it's wrong every time. You are not allowed. Stacking math is how you and I learned. 30 seconds. And she got that answer right, she got the other one wrong. And it's absolutely true about Common Core math that the one thing you cannot do is the old-fashioned stacking method. It takes 8 minutes to do a problem. As Professor Milgram points out, in every high-achieving math country in the world, kids start algebra in 7th grade or even 6th. In No Child Left Behind America, American kids didn't start math till 8th grade. Under Common Core, algebra begins in 9th grade, which means your kids will not be able to get calculus and higher math in high school anymore. There's nothing rigorous about this. And the funny thing about, if that's all it was, if that's what Common Core was, if every time you did a problem you did it the same way, if in every single textbook a square is 100 and a cube is 1,000, then we could figure it out. But the thing is that it's done 1,000 different ways. Sometimes it's squiggly lines, sometimes it's dots and dashes. In one famous Wisconsin example, elementary school kids were only allowed to add by drawing cows. Add and subtract, because we're the dairy state. So I guess here you do alligators. But in Common Core math, right, and literally you had little kids having, if you wanted to add or subtract the number, you had to draw enough cows so that if you counted the legs of the cows, you got the right number. So you understand why this takes so long? And do you understand that this is not math for kids who can do math? This is math for really bad math students like I was. Hey, when I was in 3rd grade, I had a 2nd grade math level. Right? You tell me I can draw cubes and squares and lines on the board, and you're going to put me in a group with 2 other kids, I'm always going to agree with the one. I don't care what the kid's answer is. Right? This curriculum is designed to make low achievers feel good. It is the kiss of death for high achievers. Right? And look, this is the shocking thing about it. You got moms and dads freaking out all over the country. This is just one of 25 different school districts across the country who've already done this. You got moms and dads freaking out in California because 5th graders could not yet add and subtract independently. 5th graders. So California moms and dads started hiring tutors for their kids. Well, the school freaked out. You've now got American schools threatening students not to move any further ahead, right? Because when you've got standards-based education, it destroys the standards every bit as much as if you go beyond them, as if you fall behind them. I don't know if you know this, but in the last 2 years, we've lost more gifted and talented education programs across the country than in the last 40 years combined because you can't have high achievers. And by the way, high achievement is not acceptable. Right? When I was in 3rd grade, I had a 2nd grade math level, but I had a college level reading. I don't know why I didn't read especially well. It was just something that was given to me. Right? But in 3rd grade, I was allowed to read college level books. It's probably why I entered the high finance field of English professor, right? But so what? We don't want kids to be the same. What would my life have been like if I had to read Beezus and Ramona for the next 5 years? Would I have really become the reader and writer that I've become? No. But that's not fair, see, that I had this gift. And it's not fair of your kids if they can do math well. So everyone's going to have to be pulled down. And here are your threats, a warning and a threat from school districts. The links on, this is the Irvine Unified School, the entire school district for Irvine, California, Orange County. The links on this page are intended to support the classroom instruction your child receives from the teacher. It is not appropriate to go ahead or to use this site to have your child work on math intended for use in subsequent grades. There's the warning. Now here's an actual threat from one of 25 different American school districts. It says, your child's math instruction and math placement will not change as a result of moving ahead. You got American schools now telling kids, no matter what you do, no matter how you do it, you are going to stay put. This means that your child will continue to work in the grade level appropriate math materials regardless of any work you turn in.
This is socialism in the classroom. Everybody gets it.
Yes, sir. It doesn't matter what your attitude is, what your skills are, how hard you work. All that matters is, and you know as well as I do, and it's always been this way with socialism, right? If you set a bar that everybody has to get to, is that bar going to be high or low? Very low. And welcome to your new American curriculum. Data mining, you know a lot about it. I don't have time to labor about it. That's the new building they built in Utah, multi-million-dollar facility, where the one that the Utah politicians are trying to cut off the water to, right, because they don't want it, where all your kids' information, all the data they're going to mine on your kids is going to be stored. When you and I went to school, the only thing that ever appeared on the transcripts was our final grades. Now, every single teacher comment, every single assignment, quiz grade, every single remark that your kid is evaluated on becomes part of their permanent record from the time they're 5 to the time they graduate. And the feds have already said they plan to make your kids' files available, your entire file available to employers when they go to finally go get a job. So, under Common Core, under Obamacare, your kids are babies until they're 27. So when your kid hits 28 and goes to get his first job, the employer is going to get his whole academic record. To say nothing of this, a document from the Department of Education that includes these. These are ways they plan to biologically meter your kids. The one on the right's my favorite. It's what would ordinarily be a blood pressure cuff, but they fixed it for little kids so they can wear them around the wrist. Measures heart rate, pulse, blood pressure. They ask kids, one little girl, again in New York, Kentucky, and Florida, your state, are 3 states where Common Core was rolled out very early, which means in those 3 states, we already have 2 years of testing. Right? All 3 states are trying to get out of it. You know, the governor bailed on the national test, which was good. That's a big first step here in Florida. New York, I told you what they're doing. This is interesting. The little Florida girl came home with a purple bruise around her wrist. And mom said, what happened to you? Mom would never have known. They put one of those on her wrist, had it too tight. She was dragged into a room with a principal and a school nurse. She was asked hundreds of questions with that around her wrist, including, do your parents vote? Did they vote in the last election? Who did they vote for in the last election? Are there guns in your house? Would you feel better if somebody from the school came and took those guns away? Are your parents divorced? This woman was divorced. Would you feel better if the school helped you live with the parent of your choice? Hundreds of questions like this. My state, Wisconsin, Governor Walker, yay, right? Governor Walker and the Republican legislature in Wisconsin 2 months ago set aside $7.1 million to data mine our Wisconsin kids because the Race to the Top application requires it. If you took Race to the Top money, then you have to report this data to the feds, right? And that's 46 states that took Race to the Top money. Winding down, I want you to pay attention to this document. These are the National Sexuality Standards. Notice what they're called. They're national, which means they're federal. They're standards, which means they're going to have to test your kids on these. They are core content. What do you think that means? And they start teaching your kids this sex ed at 5, these sex standards at age 5. It's already been written. This document was not meant to be rolled out like English and math so states can say, oh, no, we don't want that. This document was written to be fed into every other aspect of Common Core. How do we know? You open the document to page 6 and you see this. When the federal government sat down to write the sexuality education standards, they consulted a bunch of things to see how they would do it, including the Center for Disease Control, but look at the last one on the list. Common Core state standards for English and math. Why in the world would the national sexuality standards have to consult English and math curriculum? Do you remember that question I left hanging about 10 minutes ago? Why is there so much graphic sex and violence and what little literature is left in your English classes? Because your kids are going to have to meet the standard somehow. They're not going to, we know, if they're going to start teaching your kids at 5 years old, we know they don't pull kindergartners out of class and teach them biology, or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds. So what are they doing? They're sexing up. They're completely loading with all sorts of sexuality stuff, all sorts of graphic homosexuality. They're loading it up in math and English and the assignments that come with every other piece of Common Core. And that's pretty shocking. The national sex standards actually went to Common Core English and math to figure out how to write themselves. And here are some of the standards. By the time your kid's 7, by the time she's 7, she will identify different kinds of family structures and demonstrate ways to show respect for different types of families. How many of you teach your kids about sex and relationships at age 5 and 6? You don't, do you? But the federal government's going to now. And you see what the problem is here. If you come from a Christian home, you come from an Orthodox Jewish home, you come from a conservative home, can you show respect for different kinds of families without embracing them all? In other words, I don't even see how a 6-year-old would be able to, but say you had a well-educated 6-year-old who objected to gay marriage on all sorts of bounds. Can you now, if this is the standard? And why are you putting this in 6-year-olds' heads? 6-year-olds can't understand this stuff. Why do you think the feds are teaching 6-year-olds this in Common Core English and math and science? Because it's brainwashing, right? How about this? By the time she's 7, you will describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls, 7-year-olds, describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls may be expected to act, and provide examples of how friends, family, media, society, and culture influence ways boys and girls think they should act. In other words, if math isn't true, then neither is biology. What is gender? There are no boys and girls. Everything is just a spectrum, like Jerry Brown in California, the law he passed last summer. You know that law? Jerry Brown passed a law in California, the first in the country, whereby any kid who shows up to public school from age 5 to age 18, any kid, a 5-year-old, shows up in public school and declares that he's actually a girl, you immediately have to let that little boy into the girls' restroom. You cannot prohibit that little boy from playing on women's sports teams, including using the lockers and showers with the opposite gender. Right? That's already moving across the country, right? The move to 3 bathrooms now and there. How much is that going to cost us? So what's that going to cost a broke nation now, right? But we're talking 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. By the time your kid is in 5th grade, by the time your kid is 10 years old, look at how the bottom one. That's the standard. Your 10-year-old is going to have to define sexual orientation as the romantic attraction of an individual to someone of the same gender or someone of a different gender by the time they're 10. That's the standard. That's why they're going to start working on them at age 5. We have one little school in Wisconsin, Denmark, Wisconsin. We gave a talk just like this. One teacher was in the audience and her sister. The teacher, when I got to this, the teacher stood up and interrupted me, and she held up a little red card. And we had a bunch of moms in the audience who held up their little red cards. Apparently in second grade, 6, 5, 7 years old, by a bunch of 7-year-old kids in Denmark, Wisconsin, the teachers gave them a little red card that they didn't necessarily, they collected it, so most of the kids turned theirs back in. All the kids had to sign a little red pledge card. It was a 7-year-old pledge to defend and support homosexual marriage and homosexual lifestyles every year they're a student in that school. The objective was for the kids to sign that pledge card and turn it in. 2 or 3 of the kids, for some reason, dumped the card into their bags, and the moms found them, and the teacher was there and held them up. Right? 7-year-olds being forced to, and moms would never have known about it, had some of those kids not just bagged them. Okay, how do they plan on instituting the sex standards? Here, they're taken directly from how they're going to teach this to your kids, part of the document. Here's what they say, the feds. Instruction by qualified sexuality education teachers is essential for student achievement. So in other words, it's my school, it's already happening, universities. Universities who teach your kids to be teachers, they are already, kids who want to be math teachers and English teachers and history teachers are already having modules added on to their teaching about, to teach them how to teach sex in English or how to teach sex in history, because that's what the standard calls for. How about this? Students need opportunities to engage in active and cooperative learning strategies with regards to the sex standards. How about this? Sufficient time must be allocated for students to practice skills relating to sexuality education. And how about this? Students need multiple opportunities and a variety of assessment strategies to determine their achievement of the sexuality education standards and performance. That's the national curriculum that's already aligned with Common Core. Now, this is the most alarming thing I'm going to show you today. So I say it advisedly. It's a little graphic. This poster I'm about to show you hangs on the front of the classroom board in Shawnee, Kansas. It's not Madison, Wisconsin. It's not Berkeley, California. This is the Bible Belt. In a middle school, 6th graders, in a middle school in Shawnee, Kansas, the poster I'm about to show you it's hung all semester there. When these kids went back to school in September, it was there, and it's there now. Here's the poster. How do people express their sexual feeling? Remember, we're talking 6th graders here. We're talking 11-year-olds. This poster faces those kids every day. It's right next to Clifford the Big Red Dog at the front of the classroom. And notice the title of the poster, How Do People Express Their Sexual Feelings? And they do it by kissing. And this is so indicative of the Common Core. They don't even bother to proofread. They got talking on there twice, and they spelled caressing, caressing. Doesn't that just sum it all up, right? And you see, and I'm not reading them, but you see what else is on that list. And do you understand that for a public school system that is obsessed with birth control to the point of fetishization, there's nothing on this poster that suggests that some of these behaviors are more dangerous than others, that some of these behaviors might be disease-ridden or might lead to pregnancy? In other words, the purpose of this is not sex. The purpose of this is sociology. They want your kids to recognize that all those things, so saying I like you is every bit as sexual as some of those other things, right? Simply talking to somebody now is sexual. What they're doing to your 6th graders is they are telling them that you can't object to any of those things. You can't make any kind of ethical or moral distinction between anything on that list. And when the little 6th grade girl took a picture of that poster and brought it home to Dad, predictably Dad freaked out. Even better than the poster is the response Dad got from Shawnee Middle School, and here it is. The poster that you reference is actually part of our middle school health and science materials, and so it is a part of our district-approved curriculum, and here's the kick in the pants. The curriculum it is a part of aligns with the national standards I just showed you, and so it stays, and it's there today. That's Shawnee Hocker Grove Middle School spokeswoman Leanne Neal, middle school. It's already in the schools, and it's already in Common Core. Well, not surprisingly, this kind of graphic violence, this kind of absurd math pedagogy. And think about the math examples I showed you. The only possible reason, there's nothing mathematical about it, as Milgram points out. This is in no way, shape, or form a mathematics curriculum. What it is, however, is an attempt to keep you as moms and dads from being able to help your kids. That's what it is. We've got CPAs, I got a mom in Green Bay who's a medical doctor. She aced her college boards in math when she was in college, 100%. She can't help her 5th grader with math. That's the design, right? That you don't get to teach your kids about sex anymore. When you think fit and how you think fit, they're going to do it for you. And math class, right? We're going to make math so arcane and obtuse that you can't help them, so they're going to need us to teach them. And we decide that. Again, remember what I said. If you ask me in one word what this curriculum is about, I'd say it's statism. It's about convincing kids at every conceivable level that they belong first to government, not to family, not to country, not to religion, not to God, not to you, the parents. I head through country, and to their government they belong. Right? And then I'm almost done. Not surprisingly, this has given rise to all sorts of psychological trauma to kids who've had to suffer through it. Right? In Wisconsin, we haven't had our first national tests yet. Florida's had them, and we already see there's been a lot of trouble with the kids here in Florida. I'm about to show you simply one. We've got a document with over 200 signatures on from clinical psychologists and developmental psychologists, people on every angle of the political spectrum. They've all come together very loudly to say this is a kind of child abuse. You can't expose kids to this kind of stuff at these ages. I'm just going to show you one by way of ending. This is Dr. Mary Calamia from New York. Right? She's one of the reasons New York, even the teachers union now, is thinking about getting rid of this because of what's happened in her watch. Okay, here's Dr. Mary.
Good afternoon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm a psychotherapist. I work with parents, children, and about half of my caseload is teachers also. My caseload represents about 20 different school districts in Suffolk County. In the fall of 2012, my phone started ringing. I started getting an inordinate number of referrals of students, a lot of honors students, 8th graders mostly, who were self-mutilating. They were cutting themselves with sharp objects. and they were burning themselves with cigarettes. My phone never stopped. And I didn't know why. I asked the kids, and all they kept saying was, "We can't take the pressure, it's too much." I also started getting a lot of elementary school students referred to me. They were refusing to go to school. They said they felt stupid and that school was too hard. They were throwing tantrums, begging to stay home, and upset to the point of vomiting. I was hearing from parents about kids bringing home homework they couldn't help them with. I was alarmed to hear that in some cases there were no textbooks for the parents to look at, and they had no idea what their children were learning. The teachers were reporting a staggering level of anxiety and depression, and that was when I first heard the term Common Core and learned about the standards that we now say set the bar so high anyone can walk right under it. Everyone was talking about the tests. As the school year progressed and the tests loomed, my patients were increasing their self-mutilating behaviors. They were complaining of insomnia, panic attacks, loss of appetite, depressed mood, and in one case, suicidal thoughts that resulted in a 2-week hospital stay for an adolescent. We can't regulate biology. Young children cannot engage in the type of critical thinking that the Common Core calls for. That would require a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that is not fully functional until adulthood. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking, rational decision-making, and abstract thought, all things that the Common Core requires prematurely. We give children pre-assessments, tell them to succeed, and then give them tests on material they haven't learned and tell them it's okay to fail. They cannot resolve that mixed message. Last spring, a 6-year-old encountered a multiplication sign on the NWEA first grade math exam and asked the teacher what it was. The teacher was not allowed to help him and told him to just do his best. From that point on, the student's test performance went downhill. He couldn't shake off the unfamiliar symbol and couldn't believe his teacher wouldn't help him. The Common Core requires children to read informational texts that are owned by a handful of corporations. They don't have a filter to distinguish good information from bad. So whatever you put in front of them, they take that as gospel. They're literal. So when we give them a textbook that explains the Second Amendment as, the people have the right to keep and bear arms in a state militia, they will look no further for clarification. We ask them to write critically using emotionally charged language to persuade instead of inform. They don't have that functional prefrontal cortex, so they tap into their limbic system, which is the part of the brain that involves basic human emotions, anger and fear being the foremost. So when we ask them to use emotionally charged language, we're actually asking them to fuel their language with fear and anger and aggression. They cannot temper this judgment. They don't have the ability to do that. So we teach to the test, which I think doesn't really measure learning. I think the tests measure endurance and resilience. Only a child who can sit still for 90 minutes, come back the next day and do it again, and the next day again, can succeed. I'm going to introduce you to a couple, I'm almost done. I'm going to introduce you just a couple of student stories, okay? A couple of the faces of the Common Core. We have an entire third grade class that spent the entire day sobbing after one testing session. A second grader who witnessed this is now in third grade and won't go to school. She's being evaluated, a 7-year-old being evaluated for psychotropic medication just to get her to go to school. A 6-year-old who came home crying because in September, in the first grade, she didn't know what a vertex was. 2 8-year-olds opted out of the ELA exam and were publicly denied cookies because the teacher gave them to the class but wouldn't give them to them. And that teacher, who under duress, felt obligated to do such a thing. A 6th grader who once aspired to be a writer but now won't do it because we do it all day long, even in math. And a mother who has to leave work early because her son is hysterical over his math homework, and his CPA grandfather who's babysitting for him can't even help him do it. And countless other kids who are refusing to go to school, feel stupid, and now are completely turned off to education. I will conclude with this one thought. Our country became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. This isn't rocket science. It doesn't take a great deal of technology or corporate or government involvement to help our children to succeed. We need to rethink the Common Core and the associated high-stakes testing and get back to the business of educating our children in a safe, healthy, and productive manner. Thank you.
A couple quick final things to say. As a 20-year college professor who's taught high school, you know this. You're the audience who knows this. For about 40 years now, under the guise of teaching your kids how to read and write, professors, teachers, teachers' unions have been sneaking in all sorts of liberal garbage. The difference between that and this now is that where the first emphasis used to be on teaching them reading, writing, and math, and then bringing in the indoctrination, here's your big switch now. The first thing is the indoctrination, and they don't really care about the other stuff. That's the big flip. That's why Common Core is such a big deal, and it is a huge deal. I want to say, if you want any of this information, go to Freedom Project. I want to say, too, by way of ending this, that as I think you all know, Freedom Project is a division of the American Opinion Foundation, and our intellectual and physical godfathers and godmothers are the John Birch Society. We would not be doing this if it weren't for the support of the JBS. So would you please give them a hand for this? We are exceedingly grateful for the work you allow us to do. We ask you to consider supporting us, because besides having a school that does these kind of things, I've been in 27 states talking about Common Core. I've given over almost 100 talks in Wisconsin, over almost 200 talks if you factor in all the other states. I see JBS chapter people here from all over the country who've brought me in to speak in their parts of the country. This is what we're doing with the goodwill you've invested in us, and we're going to keep fighting this fight all the way. I thank you for listening to me very much.